Wills, I'm sorry, Dee Dee Wills. She's a professor of anthropology and former department chair at Cal Poly Pomona, and so she's going to talk about how the process went at Pomona and what the results are and what the faculty input was like, and then we can ask her questions and share our experience with her, and hopefully gain some insights. Okay, great, thanks.
Don't worry about the name. No, people mess it up all the time.
Okay, put an imaginary on it. Wasn't it on?
You need a mic? Is this not on?
It's not.
Let's see if I can get it.
I mean, your voice is projecting pretty well.
I can speak up if need be.
But,
How's this?
Yes.
You like that, huh? Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me, Jennifer. And I understand that you all are the most powerful people on campus, the greatest activists and advocates for faculty issues. So I'm very flattered that you gave me some of your Friday afternoon to come and talk. And I want to hear a lot from you too, so I'll try not to talk too much, but I do have a few things to say. I understand that I'm here to tell you about our experience with a very similar process, and if you look at our website, which I had up there a second ago, you'll see just how similar it is to yours. I've perused your website on your Path to Distinction planning, and it looks a whole lot like what we went through. Ours was between the years of 2005 and 2007, and theoretically we put a stop to it, but it has risen like a nasty phoenix in another form, which I'll tell you about. So I'll tell you a little bit of history. I'll try to put this in the context in which I understand it, or am trying to understand it. And I'll go over a little bit of what we did that we think helped us to beat it back, at least for the little period of time that we've managed to beat it back in. So one of the things that I think this belongs to in terms of discourse is the whole corporatization of the university and of the private sector institutions anyway. And so I like to call these entities that we're turning into education management organizations, or EMOs, not to be confused with punk rock groups. My background is, as Jen said, in anthropology. I've been teaching at Cal Poly Pomona for quite a long time, since 1988 in fact, and that was not my first teaching job either, or professional work. I worked for the State Department for 4 years in West Africa. I lived in West Africa for 8 years doing research and teaching, and I've taught as a lecturer or visiting professor at a few other universities too before coming to Cal Poly. So I have a lot of experience in which to make comparisons between things that are happening at different kinds of institutions. I also was our WASC coordinator from 1998 to 2003. So I know a little bit about how they think about things from that. One of the things that they've talked about on our campus, and did on your campus, was changing the name of the university. We thought some good alternatives might be, "What's a matter you?" Or a couple of my colleagues liked the idea of calling it WTFU, because of the apparent transformation of the university from a place where the dominating activities were teaching and research and advising and scholarship and creative arts and so on, to a place where the dominant activities, the things that are most visible on the website and that have taken over most people's time and energy, are stuff like this. So our process was called P&R, Prioritization and Recovery, which is the name of the now infamous book by Robert Dickinson by the same name. But it's pretty much identical with things called at other campuses or variously at our campuses too, restructuring, re-engineering. We did a bunch of exercises called vision and identity. Did a bunch of exercises called branding. We're now engaged in something called program evaluation, which is really program elimination. Different kinds of reviews. We had a review process called joint review, and this was in the 90s before they had really gotten their language down right. I think deliverology is part of this. If you want to talk about Sir Michael Barber, we can talk about him. His name comes up in the prioritization literature, and I don't know if you've had any exposure to his work on your campus, but I see some heads nodding, so you probably don't need me to introduce him to you. We have talked about distinctiveness and distinction. Of course, the ever-present accountability measures and assessment regimens, SWOT analyses. We did those at the departmental levels. Have you done some of these?
Yes.
You all know what a SWOT analysis is? Straight out of the management textbooks. So I think that they persist in inflicting these initiatives on us because even if they're not successful, they are the gift that keeps on giving for the administration. They keep the faculty in constant turmoil. They keep us busy all the time. They're a kind of shock and awe in our lives. Whereas earlier in my career, which started in the late 1970s, we were concerned with things like, what do the students need to know, and how do I find that out? And I was teaching in Nigeria when I first started, and my concern was, how do I prepare lectures with the lights out all the time? But our lives are now dominated by committee work. They get to hire a lot of consultants and work with a lot of business partners, which they love. So we've got a lot of activities that are ancillary to the actual business of universities, which has something to do with education, that are being run by education management specialists. Here's an ad for one that I ran into. It doesn't take long before you see these things if you look at the Chronicle or Higher Ed Today or whatever. So this one said, here's the conference name, free up resources by learning a better way to determine which programs should be invested in, downsized, cut, or merged. So they presume to know how to do these things and presume to be the ones who should make the decision. The faculty are rarely consulted. If you go to such a conference, you won't see any ordinary, faculty. You'll see people who have seeped into one administrative position or another and who are learning how to do this talk. They rarely engage the local expertise that they have on campus to do these exercises, even though there may be a lot of planners. For instance, on our campus, there's a Department of Urban and Regional Planning that awards master's degrees in planning. They never ask those people for help. They did an environmental scan before they did our P&R exercises. And they hired an expensive company to come in and do it, despite the fact that there are many, many people with much more regional knowledge and ability to do that kind of research on our campus, in the faculty. But they avoid us like the plague because they figure our expertise is good for something else than what they have in mind. And that's because what they have in mind is a charade of sorts. Here was another one of these conferences. This one, the headliner is Dickinson and a colleague of his. And they phrased the problem, an invented problem, in slightly different language. Which programs are most important to the institution's mission, overall financial health, and competitiveness? How do you ensure that your institution will be stronger as a result of doing the things that you're going to learn from this conference? It's actually frightening to think about how much time and energy and resources and effort go into these conferences on the part of our universities. They're sending administrators there. Somebody's paying for that, and they're doing that instead of something else that we might actually consider to be part of the mission of the university. Our mission statement still says some pretty benign things, like we want to have excellent education. It doesn't say we want to spend a whole lot of time doing some ersatz planning exercises. So the events that I find pertinent to this inquiry that have happened on our campus roughly began in the early 90s with some serious strategic planning stuff. At that time, they started doing a few little program cuts. So there were some full professors whose programs got cut, and they were going around to other departments having job interviews. So a guy from recreational horticulture came to talk to geography and anthropology. He has some overlap with geographers and anthropologists. But it was really quite sad, because we would have had to invent some courses for him to teach. And in fact, that program had some majors. They cut the social work program and have regretted it subsequently. But they didn't really know how to do this business very well, because the criteria they were using had nothing to do with what faculty were actually doing. It was quite sad. WASC gets involved in these things, I think, a good deal. If you all are familiar with what WASC is, to me it is a two-headed Janus of sorts. One of the heads looks at Washington, at the Department of Ed, and in some sense protects us from the Department of Ed taking over the regulation of education. As you can imagine, lots of Congress people and civil servants who work in the Department of Ed, the Michelle Rees of this world, think that direct management of public education, and maybe all education, would be a good thing. And they imagine that they know how to do that, right? So WASC, insofar as it represents its member institutions, and stands as a bulwark between officialdom, educrats, and us, is a good thing. But in order to keep them off our backs, they erect a platform that those technocrats can understand of accountability language. So they are fully behind every one of these kinds of plans that our universities come up with. I'm sure WASC is going to love the planning for distinction that you all are doing. They would have loved ours because the president had it fully displayed in the self-study at that time that we were engaged in prioritization and recovery tactics. And so his life was very messed up when that did